Hello everyone, welcome to Writing Analysis. This is where I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things in the world, which is writing. And more specifically, I'm going to be talking about my personal writing process. Now, I know a lot of other writers and authors talk about this and they say, oh, I can teach you how to write, or I can teach you how to be a better writer. But the truth is everyone has to have their own thing. There's no one process or one thing that's just going to work for everybody. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or they're selling you something. Probably both. So why am I doing this? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is because hopefully one day I'll be at least a semi-famous writer, and therefore there'll be people who are just curious about me and about my process and everything like that. I know I like to learn more about my favorite authors and directors and things like that. So this will be for them, hopefully. Another reason is because I just feel it's actually a very unique process. I've heard a lot of other writers and storytellers talk about their process, and mine is actually very, very different than all of theirs. So I think it's kind of good to offer a bit of a different perspective. And then last but certainly not least, even if you don't follow my process exactly, you still may be able to benefit by taking like little pieces of it. You may say, well, that part doesn't really make sense, or that part's not really going to work for me, but I like this idea about this, So maybe you could just take a few pieces of, my process and then make your own process out of it. That's kind of what I do with marketing. With the writing thing, I've never really had to borrow from other people because, again, I've always kind of had my own unique process and it's always worked really well for me. But when it comes to marketing, I need all the help in the world. I'm very terrible at it, which is actually why I'm going to shamelessly plug myself right now. My Soul Burned by Nathan Crockett. How did I get here? It's a question we've all asked ourselves. When the devil starts to ask herself the same question, she begins to recollect her tragic fall from grace. My Soul Burned is a brutally atrocious tale of violence, sex, and despair, narrated by the devil herself, as she elaborates on her extraordinary transformation from God's most beloved angel to cursed outcast to the epitome of all that is evil. Now, I didn't really need to read that. I memorized it. I just wanted you to know that's the synopsis I have, and that's really the best way I could feel to describe this book. And when people ask me, it's like, hey, it's right there. I took a lot of time on this. I really can't think of a better way to describe it than what I just did. Anyways, My Soul Burned is available on Amazon.com in both paperback and digital format. Unfortunately, I don't know how to create links in a video. But if you go to Amazon.com, type in My Soul Burned, it's literally the first one that pops up. It is the only book on Amazon with that title, which is actually something I'm pretty proud of. I also did a movie. It's called Strangely Depicted. I not only wrote it, but I also directed and starred in it. Again, I don't have a link here, but if you go to YouTube, type in Strangely Depicted. Again, it is the only video that pops up. It's actually in 6 different sections. I wasn't able to upload it all at the same time. I know there's ways to do it. I just wasn't able to at the time, and then now I have all kinds of technical issues and blah. Anyways, it's there. It's the only videos with that title. So yeah. Now, in my own defense, these are not completely shameless plugs, because anytime you're taking advice from someone, you should ask yourself, well, does this person even know what they're talking about? And the only way you can know that, the only way you can know if I'm a good writer and if you should even take my advice, is to check out my stuff. So it's also for your benefit as well. All right. So now that we got all that out of the way, let's start with what my process actually is. So first, of course, you have to have the idea. And for me personally, a lot of times they just come to me. Like, I'll just randomly get the idea, or someone will say something that'll spark an idea. They come from all kinds of different places and different ways and things like that. I'm not going to use any of my own ideas in this example, and I'm not going to use anyone else's just because I don't want to have to deal with copyright or spoilers or anything like that. So I'm just going to come up with some just very simple, vague, basic concepts. Again, just to give you the idea of what the process is. Let's just say the idea that I have is about a superhero who has super strength. Again, I know it's very typical. I wouldn't do this, but just a simple, vague example. So then you think, well, how does he get his super strength? Well, let's just say he infuses himself with ape DNA. So I'll think of a scenario in which this guy gets infused with ape DNA, whether he injects himself, maybe he gets bit, some sort of accident, whatever, and I'll write it down on a little flashcard. Ape DNA, maybe a description of how this happens. And then what's he gonna do with his super strength? Maybe there's like some really cool like subway fight scene. So I'll write down subway fight. But it can't be all action, maybe he has a nice little picnic with his girlfriend, picnic with girlfriend. Or maybe despite the fact that he has all this strength, he still takes the time for the little things. Maybe he helps an old lady across the street. Now, obviously, I don't just pull ideas out of my butt this quickly. I'm just doing it a little faster for the sake of the video. Normally, this process will take me at least a good couple days, sometimes even a few weeks, where I'll just kind of be thinking of ideas, different scenarios, different things that can happen within the story. Then once I have at least 20, maybe even 30 ideas, I'll take all the flashcards and I'll put them on the floor. And then I start to organize them. I'm not going to show you the floor of flashcards. We're just going to pretend this is a floor full of flashcards. So then I'll start organizing them. I'll say, this event happens, and then this event happens, and then so on and so forth. And as I'm doing this, I make sure that it has a nice flow, that it has a nice pace, that things are progressing in a logical fashion. Again, I want to make sure that this scene leads into this scene, and this scene leads into this scene, and so on and so forth. And I also think of a beginning, middle, and an end. I know a lot of writers, they want to wait till the end to write the ending. I don't do that. The reason why I write the ending right now is because right now the story is kind of small. It's in the idea phase. And when it's smaller, it's much easier to kind of wrap everything together. And then later on, as I expand the story and I add in new things, I can make sure that all of those new things are going to lead to this ending. So that way you never run into the problem of, oh, I got this far and now I don't know where to go. Or I wanted the story to end here, but the story just kind of took off in this direction. I've never had that problem. Again, some people might think this is sort of restrictive, like, oh, you need to let your ideas flow and just, go wherever. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but me personally, I've never felt restricted by this. I've always felt, even though I knew where I was going and how I wanted the story to end, I never really felt restricted. I always just felt like, okay, I can make this work and I can make this work. I've never had an idea that I had to say, well, no, that doesn't go where I wanted it to go. I'm always able to make that go where I want it to go because I know exactly where I want it to go. Now, sometimes as I'm doing this, I'll realize that certain things don't add up. Like I'll say, maybe this scene doesn't lead into this scene. And in that situation, I'll think of another idea that I could just sort of slide in between here. Or maybe I'll move this idea over here and put it in between there. But again, you go through, or I go through, and I make sure that everything is progressing in a logical fashion, that all the big important moments that I want to be in here are in here, and that everything flows right and it has a beginning, middle, and an end. Then once all that's done, then I create an outline, which is basically the exact same thing as the flashcards, except for it's all on a single sheet of paper. That way I don't have to carry the flashcards around and like put them in order and all that stuff. So I just write all the ideas down and I write them in the order that I have them on my flashcards. This is the first event, second event, third, fourth, fifth, and so on and so forth. And then I start writing my first draft. And on the first draft, I don't really worry about the details. Like, let's just say if there's a scene where they're going to go to a house. If I know what I want the house to look like, then of course I'll go ahead and write it down. But let's just say I haven't decided yet. I'm not going to stop the story to figure out what the house is going to look like. I just will say it's a house, and I'll leave it at that for now. And I just write the story. And once the story is finished, then, my first draft is done, and that's when I start letting people read it to get feedback. Now, typically, most writers will tell you that your first draft should actually be the longest, and then you should cut. I actually do the opposite. My first draft is the shortest, and then I expand. And there's a couple reasons why I do this. Number one is because when you're trying to get people to read it, when you want feedback, it is way easier to get someone to read 100 pages than it is to get someone to read 600 pages. you know. Another reason is because it's just a lot of extra work to do it the other way, to write all of this stuff and then you just cut all this stuff out. Like, I only write things that I need. I'll get feedback from people. They'll say, hey, I really like these two characters. I want to see more of them. Or they say, you know what, there's not a whole lot of description in this area. Like, I feel like, I don't really know what's going on here. Or, hey, this is a good idea. Maybe you could expand upon it a bit more. Things like that. And then I will expand the story based on what is necessary. So it's kind of like if you wanted to work out, let's just say you're a skinny guy, or I am a skinny guy, and you want to get buff. You could do it one of two ways. You could either start eating healthy and, start working out and start eating the necessary things you need to start gaining muscle. Or you could let yourself get fat first. You could overeat, let yourself get fat, and then try to trim that fat and turn it into muscle. Technically, both will work, but the second one is just way more effort. Like I said, with this one, I just start out small and then I just add things that are necessary. So in the end, you still get a lean, well put together story, but I don't have to worry about cutting things. And last but certainly not least is it saves you the heartbreak. I've heard so many authors, and writers talk about how, oh, I wrote this really great scene, but I had to cut it because the story was too long, or it just didn't really fit, or, whatever the reason. I have never had to cut something I didn't want to, because again, I'm only adding what is necessary to the story. And then once I've done this process like a bunch of times, I go through and I add some stuff, and then I go through and I add some more stuff, then I go through and I add some more stuff until eventually it feels right. Like it's the size I want it. Like the book I did, it ended up being 75,000 words, which is like kind of like the standard. But the first draft was like only, I think, 28,000. So it's like 3 times bigger than it was. Phrasing. God, that's awful. I might cut that, or I might not. I don't know. Anyways, so overall, that's my process. So basically, I come up with the idea. I put all the ideas on flashcards, I get a good collection of different things I want to happen. I organize them. I get my beginning, middle, and end. I make sure the pacing's right. I make sure that everything is progressing in a logical fashion. Then I write an outline. I write the first draft. And then after I get feedback from the first draft, I start expanding the story and adding what is necessary to, make sure all the characters are developed, to make sure all the stories are expanded upon, and to just overall make sure that everything feels nice and complete. And then, of course, at the end, you got to think of the title. Now, usually, I start thinking of the title towards the beginning. Sometimes I'll have a title. Like most of my stories actually go through several titles as I'm writing it. And I think the title is pretty important. Some people say, like, oh, who gives a crap what it's called? But it actually does matter, especially if you're like an author that's trying to get discovered, because that's a way you could catch people's attention, is by having a unique title. I know with my titles, My Soul Burned, it's not one I'm super proud of, but I mean, I like it. But Strangely Depicted is actually my favorite title that I've come up with, because whenever I tell people that title, I always get the same reaction, which is kind of like this little head tilt, they're kind of like, huh, that sounds interesting. So it gets their attention. Plus, once you have a unique title, it's also easier to find you. Like I was saying earlier in the thing, I could tell people, like, if for whatever reason I can't give people the link, I could just tell people, go to Amazon, My Soul Burned, only book that pops up. I could tell people, go to YouTube, type in Strangely Depicted, only video that comes up. So there is a real benefit to actually having a very unique title. And there you have it. That's my particular writing process. Hopefully, if you're struggling with writing, this will help you out. If not, hopefully you at least found it interesting. And if you like this video and you want to see more, I have a website called desma.wixsite.com. You could go there. I have like tons of video reviews and all kinds of different stuff. Plus, my book and my movie are also available there as well. So have a good one.